Leading up to Christianity, I mentioned in the last chapter the mystery religions. These religions would go around picking the very best of the best people and kept a lot of what they did secret. Some people say that Christianity sprang from the mystery religions. Others say no, but at least Christianity was influenced by the mystery religions. Whatever, the mystery religions came first and had a lot in common with Christianity, but with a few differences. Now, Christianity started as a sect of Judaism. The Jews had returned to their homeland after being driven to captive to Babylon by Nebuchadnezzar. Cyrus let them return. Now, folk, I could go into a lot more detail, but I won't. Here, though, is what's really significant about this part of the story. When the Jews set up their own kingdom, they did not have an adequate justice system. At least the people were discontent. So the discontented Jews began to scatter in all directions, all over the world. Very, very important, because this is to lead to the spread of Christianity later, and this set up for the spread of Christianity. Now, the Jews did not themselves try to convert people. They did not try to proselytize. Mostly you were a Jew if you were born into it. But everywhere the Jews went, all over the empire, even over here to Spain, everywhere they went, they set up a synagogue. And they would tell their neighbors that we believe there's only one God, and we believe this God has a standard of morality for us. But also they would tell the neighbors, we believe that a Messiah is coming someday. And therefore, everyone in Europe then was at least educated on the idea that someday a Messiah would come, being sent by the Jewish God. This went on for a few generations as the Jews continued to scatter out. Now, the Jews would make it a habit of at least once in a lifetime going back to Judea to celebrate a Passover. The Passover, which occurs usually around the middle of March. It varies because the Jewish calendar is different from our calendar. But they would go back, and particularly they go back on a high Passover. Now, a high Passover is a Passover that occurs on the Sabbath day. In other words, the Passover occurs on Saturday. Now, this has become very significant part of the story later. Anyway, well, there's a whole lot more detail I could go into. I won't. Just simply, very briefly, into the confusion of what was going on around the world and around, particularly in Judea. Judea was, it was conquered by Rome, by the way. That's something I must mention. Judea was conquered by Rome and became a Roman province. And unlike most of the other provinces, they were a discontented province, so much so that eventually Rome had to drive them out and scatter them farther all over the empire. But into all this confusion was born Jesus, born in Bethlehem, the story goes, spent a part of his youth in Egypt. Then his parents moved from Egypt to Nazareth, so he was called a Nazarene. His boyhood is largely unknown. Again, there are rumors that he went to India, other rumors that he went to Persia, and rumors that he went over here to Great Britain. Be that as it may, we don't have a detailed account until he turned 30. And at 30, from the time he was 30 to the time he was 33, he had his public ministry. And again, there's been all kinds of stories told about what he meant, but again, this is not a theology class, so I won't go into detail. Essentially, now here's what is important, here's what changed the whole course of Western history. He was eventually crucified by the Roman authorities, and he was crucified on a Friday before the high Sabbath. Now, this part of it is important because Jews from all over the world had gathered because it was, in fact, a high Sabbath, a high Passover, where the Passover occurred in the Sabbath. This only happened about once every 7 years. That meant that Jews were, and unlike today, where the person might go to Jerusalem, fly in and stay a day or two and then go home. In those days, when they went to Jerusalem, they stayed for weeks. That's why 50 days after Jesus was crucified, on the day of Pentecost, they heard the apostles speaking to every one of them in their own tongue. This is told in the book of Acts. And shortly after that, all these Jews then scattered all the way back over the whole world. And they began to spread the news that someone came to Judea during the last 3 years, and he was called Jesus. And this was spread not only among the Jews, but among the Gentiles. Now, whether or not Jesus actually rose from the dead, again, this is one-time, folk. I don't want a discussion on the matter. That's something each person has to decide individually. But what is important about this belief is it was to change the whole course of Western history and the whole course of Western civilization. No one has been more influential, at least in the Western part of the world, than this man was. It was like he took on the old Roman gods and brought them all down to their knees. But all this took time. Anyway, after his crucifixion, death, and resurrection, ascension, if you believe that, his disciples began to spread the news first among the Jews only. It was looked on as being a branch of Judaism. For the most part, the Jews rejected it. Now, the one person I want to emphasize, he was first called Saul of Tarsus, but I'll call him Paul of Tarsus. He is mentioned in the book. Paul of Tarsus started out very hard against Christianity. Then he became a convert himself. And he became a very strong convert, and he was highly educated, sat at the most advanced school there was of Judaism. And he began to spread the message, going first to the Jews. Now, everywhere that these missionaries went, and Paul was started out as a missionary, they would go first to a Jewish synagogue, go to a town, go to a synagogue, and they would preach that the Messiah has come, and this Messiah is Jesus of Nazareth. Well, after a while, Paul got tired of having the Jews not want to accept this message, so he said, all right, I'm going to the Gentiles. So he began to preach the message to the Gentiles, or those the non-Jews. And he made many converts among the Gentiles. Well, Paul then, while he was in prison for his belief, he wrote letters. These letters became the foundation of Christian belief that still exists to this day. Particularly, he wrote most of the New Testament, book of Romans, 1 Corinthians, 2 Corinthians, Galatians, Philippians, Colossians, Ephesians, Titus, Philemon, Hebrews, James, 1 and 2 Timothy, Titus. I believe that names most of them. But he wrote letters to these persons or to these places. And these letters became the foundation of Christian faith down through the next 2,000 years. All right, now leaving Paul, leaving Jesus, and again, making a long story short. Now, folk, I could spend the entire semester teaching only about the rise of Christianity or teaching church history, but we can't do it. What really is important was this religion slowly and gradually spread over the empire, being persecuted at first persecuted only by the Jews, then under Nero. Nero persecuted all Christians, and from that point on, for the next 200 years, Christianity was sporadically persecuted. Some emperors were very active and some not. Christians began to meet in catacombs, so in other words, underground. They went underground. The catacombs were tombs, and they would hold their worship services in catacombs. They began to develop codes, and one of their code symbols was a fish, and you still see this fish with some letters on the fish that, again, stand for Jesus. But the Christians met underground for several generations, during which time, in spite of the persecution, they grew. All right. Why did the church grow? And there's several reasons. One reason, folk, and this is not in your book, but just something I must mention. Christians lived noticeably longer than other people did. Now, it's been said that even in modern times that people of faith are more likely to recover from cancer or live slightly longer than other people, but not as much as in those days. The average non-Christian in those days lived about 30 years, owing in large part to the excessive partying, excessive eating and drinking that the non-Christians did, and Christians did not participate in. The average Christian lived about 55 or 50, between 55 and 60 years. In other words, quite a bit of difference in the length of their life. In addition, when the plagues came, other people would flee from the person of the plague. Christians thought it was their duty to stay, and half the people then who got plagues recovered. And a lot of times they said, hey, it's because of a Christian that I'm recovered, so they would convert to Christianity themselves. Also, the persecution actually helped Christians. When people would see Christians being burned alive inside a Colosseum or torn apart by lions, this made for people say, hey, I want to die like they do. Count me in, I'm one of them. And this did a lot. Also, Christianity promised a wonderful afterlife for its followers, something that pagans were lacking. For the most part, all pagans had to look forward to in the next life was just become a bunch of mind-numbed zombies. Yes, they believed in an afterlife in a place called Hades, otherwise known as Pluto, but it did not offer much for them. But Christianity offered a happy afterlife. And also, they took in anybody. And unlike the Christian religions who only took in the successful, the rich, the educated, Christians took in all types and tried to change them. Yes, Christians would take in the drunk and oftentimes could get the drunk man to forsake his ways. And yes, Christians would often take in the prostitute and get the prostitute to change her ways. So anybody was welcome. Another thing, the morality of the pagan world had become extremely bad. Now, a big question you can ask is, did Christianity change morality? Folk, if you judge Christianity by the standard it claimed to have, it comes up short. In other words, their standard was here and they lived down here. But if you judge them by the standard of the pagans, Christianity seems to be better. Owing to the fact that pagan morality, there are several things wrong with pagan morality. Number one was the belief that you only follow an emperor if he's capable and strong, and you only follow an officer in the army if he appears to be the type of man you like. Christians said you follow him because of the office he holds, never mind whether you like him or not. Another thing, Christians did not believe it was right to expose babies or take unwanted babies and put them out in the wild and leave them to the wild animals to devour. Christians believed that this was wrong. And a lot of pagans, after they thought about it, thought, hey, my mother could have done this to me. I have to digress here. I mean, I listened to a singer one time sing, you know, really. Then it turned out he told us he was illegitimate, and he wound up saying, I am so glad my mother did not abort me. His mother legally could have. And the audience just jumped up and down clapping for him. Again, you would have to decide for yourself what you believe about this. But Christianity began to teach that abortion was wrong, and among some circles still does. The pagan world loved brutality in sports. Justice openly favored the rich and openly favored the strong against the weak, and the weak were run roughshod over. In other words, there was a whole lot of bad things that could be said. And I've already mentioned how that you got promoted in the ancient world if you could ingratiate yourself to the person in power, even to the point of giving yourself up sexually to the person in power. Just Julius Caesar did that, along with several other people who are known to have done that. Now, I'm not saying this has never happened under Christianity, but under Christianity, this has to be done under the rug, and under paganism, it's done in a wide open. Paganism did a lot of politics, decided a lot of political issues by assassination. I've already mentioned how the Gaius brothers were assassinated. Well, assassinations have happened under Christianity, but for 1,000 years, assassinations in Europe was very, very rare, extremely rare. You hardly heard of them. And only about the 20th century, 19th and 20th century, did assassinations start going on in the Western world again. But for the first 14 or 1,500 years under Christianity, assassinations were very, very rare. Because Christians believe you should respect your leader, even if you didn't like him, and follow your leader to the ends of the earth, that this was the best way to live. Pagans generally did not do so. And folk, I'm hesitant to say this, but I did say it in the morning class. Your book mentioned it. Women had completely lost all self-respect and the respect of the men. Their morality become utterly corrupt. they were only interested in two things, looking good or drinking and looking good. And they would advertise themselves sexually, but then never be ready to perform. They did not want to marry. They would not have children because having children could ruin their figures, in a lot of cases permanently. Now this was their view. So they wanted to keep their figure all their life. And therefore, this, by the way, led to a decline of Rome's population. And they wound up being hated. They hated each other, and they were hated by the men also. This was a big problem you had in the late Roman Empire. All right, all these factors worked to help spread the Christianity, and it has been said there was never a better time for the spread of new religion. As the old gods seemed to be impotent, they no longer seemed to speak to the old oracles, were no longer talking to the people. And again, folks, if this had all been fake, the fakery did not continue after a while. Again, each of you will have to decide for yourself what you believe. But I have to ask, I mean, why did the oracles just simply stop communicating with the followers of pagan gods? All right. Anyway, Christianity spread. Within 300 years, it became the official religion of the empire. That took 300 years. All right. Oh yes. Remember this name, he was the founder. And then Paul of Tarsus, he was the one who wrote the letters that became the foundation for Christian doctrine. All right, now we'll move on. Marcus Aurelius, leaving religion and going to politics again. He was a philosopher king. He's believed to have been quite capable. But, folk, up until his time, he was the last of the 5 good emperors. There have been 2 movies in the last 50 years made about him. One of them is Decline and Fall of the Roman Empire. And I don't recall what the other one was. What is it? Oh, okay, thank you. Yeah, well, what I was getting at is both of these movies claim that he was poisoned by his son. In actual reality, folk, there's no historical evidence for this. Now, his life was short in those days anyway. Now, he might have been. His son was I'll get to his son in a minute. His son was a very, very bad man. But anyway, Marcus Aurelius named his son as a successor, something that had not been done in a couple hundred years. The Romans were against this because Romans said, hey, we don't want a father and son to succeed a father. This is too much like the old kingdom, the old kings that we got rid of. Marcus Aurelius named his son as his successor, but his reign represented a big turning point. During his reign, a big flood hit the city of Rome. Fortunately, the people were able to get to higher ground in time, but much of the cattle and hogs and other farm animals were drowned in the flood, washed away in the flood. A big flood hit. Storms began to hit the empire. And with the storms and flood came famines. And with the famines came lowered resistance disease. And with lowered resistance disease came pestilence. In addition, wars began to be fought where Rome could no longer boast of Pax Romana. There was a big war fought in Persia, and when the army came home, well, they came home victorious. Oh yes, but they brought a big plague with them. And the plagues began to spread over the empire. So with Marcus Aurelius, you all of a sudden have wars, plagues, storms, fires, and the population began to decrease noticeably. Now, folk, we can prove it. There have been several times in Europe's history when they've had a population decline. The last one was in the late 1600s. It was caused by climate change, cooling, as you may have heard me say before. Warming does wonders for the population. Warming makes everybody happy, plant and animal alike. Cooling kills plants and animals. Anyway, there was a cooling. Wait, in 1680, the cooling. Go back to the Black Death, the year 1307. So we believe strongly that was caused by cooling down. But then the last one before that was in the during the reign of Marcus Aurelius and his successors. We believe that that one might have been caused by a cooling of the climate also, but you can't prove it back that far. You try to prove climate change by studying tree rings, which years the rings are the thickest and which years are the thinnest. That doesn't apply to back that far. So we really are not sure. We are sure that they talked about earthquakes and storms and pestilences. We don't know for sure why these things happened. Well, Marcus Aurelius was, oh yes, something else I must mention too. Coinage, a lot of Roman coins found their way into Persia, over here farther into Parthia, then into India and into China, and they never found their way back. Rome had an unfavorable balance of trade, meaning that the Romans bought more from abroad than they sold abroad. And this is something the United States might want to pay some attention to also. Inflation. Hopefully you all know what inflation is. Inflation is not the issue it was back when Jimmy Carter was president, when inflation was running rampant. Supposedly our economic experts have somewhat brought it under control. But I can remember folk paying 28 cents a gallon for gasoline. And I can also remember Richard Nixon, when gas went to 65 cents a gallon. He said, gasoline will not go to $1 a gallon. The Americans cannot pay $1 a gallon for gasoline. Well, it's now down to, I mean, I say it's down to 2.15. It's a 2.15 a gallon for most places I see, and we think that's low. But anyway, it's called inflation. The inflation, coinage was devalued. Then Caesar, backing up a bit, I mentioned how that Marius had started to hire foreigners for the Roman army. Caesar Augustus abandoned this practice and said, no, only Italians should serve. But then, as the Italians did not want to serve, and Roman citizens refused to serve in the army, the Roman emperors began to hire foreigners, and most of them Germans. And it got to where the Germans in the Roman army outnumbered the actual Roman citizens in the army. And this, of course, the problem with hiring mercenaries, they're called mercenaries, persons who fight for money. Mercenaries are known to, they'll fight when the going is good. They'll hang around when they have a good chance to win. In those days, in battles, the winning side did not lose very many men, and the losing side lost a plenty. Most of the killing then was the winning side killing the losing side. But mercenaries are known to take off running pell-mell from the battlefield when the going gets tough. When they see that the enemy looks as big as they are, they take off running. Mercenaries did not have any sense of loyalty or patriotism, just simply fight for the money. All right, after Marcus Aurelius came his son Commodus. Commodus simply said, I'm just not going to fight these wars in the Far East, and he largely abandoned the army, and Rome started losing badly, and under him Rome declined greatly. Also, Commodus was very concerned that he set himself up as a god, but he did it more so than the other emperors. He took on 12 names, and then named the 12 months of the year after himself. Each one of his names had a month. Now his calendar did not outlast him. And as soon as he was gone, the Romans went back to the Julian calendar, which they would use for the next 500 years. But basically it's called megalomania, where a person sets himself up as a god and actually believes he's God and demands that he be worshipped. Under him, the Roman Empire went down fast. Then, after Commodus, he was finally killed when the people couldn't stand him any longer. And then one of the most disgraceful events occurred in Roman history. The Romans decided who's going to be emperor by putting the office up for sale at an auction. They got together rich people and asked, what am I bid for this position of emperor? You can claim yourself God, you get all kinds of power, what am I bid? And here this person, well, Septimius Severus outbid all the others. and started a dynasty from after him. For a while, it was a hereditary dynasty. Started a dynasty, actually restored Rome for a while. But this was a disgraceful act, to say the least, with Septimius Severus bid for the empire, and then tried to undo what Commodus had done with some success. And when he died, he was followed by his son and I believe grandson, and I don't believe any more than that. Anyway, after the Severan dynasty died off, there came a period of chaos, where you had, in a 52-year period, some 24 emperors, one after another, bang, 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 bang. And of those emperors, only 2 of them died a natural death. The rest were either poisoned or knifed or assassinated. They weren't killed in war, just simply killed by, well, basically murdered. The one of them who survived to live, who died a natural death, was already in his 80s when he was made emperor. He did not live long, but at least they didn't bother killing. But the other one didn't live long either. The other one who died a natural death. Rome began to be hit by barbarian invasions, particularly from the Germans living here. The Germans, and in the east, they revived Persian and Parthian Empire. The Persian and Parthians were neighbors, but they were separate empires. The Persian and Parthian Empire began to invade and hit at the east. And someone recently pointed out that these wars, expensive wars, drained the Roman treasury, and now the United States is fighting wars in the same part of the world. And they're expensive wars, they're inconclusive wars. We never win them. The Romans never won them. And they drained the treasury, all contributing to the downfall of Rome. All right. After several years of chaos, one thing I want to insert here. During this time, the people had grown under every emperor. Every emperor seemed so oppressive. And they just said, we wish we could have a mild-mannered emperor. Well, one day they got one. And they liked him least of all. And they said the only thing that worse than having an emperor who doesn't allow anything is to have an emperor who allows everything. And they just felt like he was too lax on crime, too lax on everything, and they wanted him to clamp down on the criminal elements, and he just sat back, and you wanted a relaxed emperor, you've got one. But anyway, leaving that, Diocletian. Now, Diocletian was a general in the army who finally took over, and he decided he was going to bring order out of the chaos. Well, he realized that he could not quite handle himself, so we might say he divided the empire into 4 sections. Again, this map might show it better, but he split the empire. The one section was the east. It was to be ruled by one legate, a person who represented the emperor. Another section was here, another one was down here, and another one was down here in this part of the world. And he told each of his 4 men he appointed, now, each of you keep order and build up your own part of the empire, and that will work better than me trying to run it all myself. Well, this led to the building up of a bureaucracy. If you know anything about bureaucracy, the best example of it is in the army. In the army, you have a general. Under him are lieutenant generals. Some of the lieutenant generals are major generals. Some of the major generals are brigadier generals. And under the generals are colonels. Under the colonels are lieutenant colonels, and so on down the line. Then there are majors, captains, lieutenants, and then finally sergeants. You know, there's a hierarchy of authority. Well, Diocletian said, what works in the army, let's do in civilian life. So we created a civilian bureaucracy. The problem with these civilian and military bureaucracies, of course the military bureaucracy they always had anyway, they cost a lot of money to maintain. And again, in the United States, our government is sometimes called a bureaucratic government, levels of authority, and about 4 million government workers at different levels of authority make up the bureaucracy. And they cost a lot of money to maintain, taxes. The army was made more mobile, and this was something that Caesar Augustus had not done, neither Julius Caesar, but made the army where it could move around better, and made for supply lines for the army to keep the troops fed while they were moving. All this they should have done. However, something else. He tried to control wages and prices. Now, again, if you're a Democrat, you might think, hey, this was great. If you're a Republican, you want to say, hey, he should have left this alone. That wages and prices are better off if set by economic conditions and by the market than set by a man at the top controlling them. Again, you can make up your minds what you believe, but this issue is still, folks, still going on today. And he tried to coerce the men to take up the profession of their fathers. To make sure we always have enough blacksmiths. Every man whose father was a blacksmith must become a blacksmith himself. If your father were a weaver, you must become a weaver yourself. The women, of course, were expected to become homemakers for the most part, even though a lot of them didn't. There were a high percentage of unmarried men and women. But he believed that everybody should stay in the profession of their parents, and he enforced these laws. Well, again, I wish I could go back in time and say, hey, Your Majesty, Diocletian, leave everybody alone and they will work out their differences by market economics. There won't become too many blacksmiths, or if there are, some of them will be put out of business or go become weavers or something else. There'll always be jobs for people. If you just leave it alone, market conditions will. I mean, let's face it, I mean, you know, you talk to a plumber, you might find out he once dreamed of becoming a professional baseball player, but he couldn't make a team. I mean, let's face it, all of us young men, at least in my generation, we all dreamed of becoming professional athletes, and most of us did not make a team. So we wound up doing something else. In my situation personally, I wanted to be a history teacher, but it was 25 years after I got my degree before I became one. So what I do, I mean, I didn't start with it. I went to work for 27 years at Lockheed. Made a lot of money doing it. Why did I not start teaching? Because the field was closed. History was closed. And to some extent still is. And I became a part-time teacher. Thought, hey, this is great. I don't have to serve on committees, don't have to do public service. All I need to do is teach. And what about earning a living? Oh, I get that from Social Security and from Lockheed. Still drawing money from Lockheed, by the way. Anyway, but eventually, now folks, I'm saying that to say this, men and women both. Most of you will probably not work in the profession that you dream of working in. Now this may be a hard reality to face, really hard for you, but you might come to grips with it now. In my case, I wound up, yes, I was 51 years old when I finally became a part-time college teacher. But at least work. I don't do like one man did and refuse to work. I mean, unless I could find a job in a field, there were no jobs open in his field. He wound up, his wife supported him, his wife earned all the money, he wound up staying at home, and his little girl wound up calling him mommy even, because he was doing all the laundry and all the dishes and cleaning the floors at home, and finally his wife just got tired of him and kicked him out of the house, divorced him. Folk, if you have to take a job at a factory to live, at least do it. Sooner or later, something might open up with what you want to do. I mean, but most of us, most of you, sitting in the sound of voice right now, will probably not wind up working at the job you dream of. All right, I see. At least I got everybody awake. It's like most of you, well, not all, but most of you at least are listening. Again, this is important, folks. Now, back to Diocletian, he tried to control the profession everybody stayed in. Also, most young men do not want to become what their fathers were, and this is especially true in 21st century America. I didn't become what my father was, and he didn't want to become what his father was. And I'm not sure that my son wanted to become what I am. I know it is when I go through 5.5 or 8 years of college. Become a college teacher, I know that. All right, but again, this business of choosing profession, folks, is hard. What we today do is let the market conditions decide it. And eventually, every position that's needed gets filled. You go where the opportunity is. And today, nobody knows where that opportunity is going to be for anyone. I mean, this is true for male and female alike. All right, leaving Diocletian, the next one after him was Constantine. All right, Constantine. When Diocletian retired, The 4 people he picked to be heads of his empire started fighting each other. Essentially, you might say they had a 4-way tournament. 2 of them fought, and one of them finished the other one off. Those 2 fought, another 2 fought, and one of them finished the other one off. Then the 2 winners fought. Ultimately, the winner was Constantine.
What was it? I'm sorry. What was it like? The whole itself called like
the whole cause was they were fighting to see who the next emperor would be. Is that your to answer your question? Yeah, they were fighting to see who the next emperor would be, and when all of the fighting was done, and this was something the Romans had tried to prevent, something Diocletian hoped to prevent, but when it all was over with, Constantine had won. Now, folks, here's what Constantine is mainly remembered for. The night before the last big battle, he had a dream. And in a dream, he saw a sign of the cross. And written around the sign of the cross were the words, "By this sign, conquer." Well, he woke up convinced that it was God telling him he ought to become a Christian. Now, in some ways, politically, folk, and militarily, this seemed like the least wise thing he could have done. Only 10% of the people were Christian. And for the most part, Christians were hated by non-Christians. And folk, fast forward to 2012, and this is maybe even as true today as it was and more true. And yet, he just all of a sudden said to his army, "All right, man, before we go into battle, I want you to all paint crosses across your shields. And we're going to put crosses on our uniforms." And he had some men cut up crosses. They spent the better part of the day doing it. And he said, "We're going to go to the battle under a sign of the cross." He did not have himself baptized until he was on his deathbed, but he had heard they had his men baptized, converted. And again, this seemed like a very foolish thing to have done, with such a small percentage of the empire being Christian. Yet he went into battle and won. Having won, then he had set himself up as emperor, and one of his first acts as emperor was to issue the Edict of Toleration. The Edict of Toleration did not make Christianity the official religion of the empire. It merely made Christianity a legal religion, recognized as a legal religion. And all the magistrates throughout the emperor got the message that all persecution of Christians was to stop. They knew that if they persecuted a Christian, they were going to be reported on or whatever, and Constantine would hear about it, and he'd be upset. So all persecution, it was to be some 500 or 600 years before anyone in Western Europe was persecuted for their beliefs again. So for the next several centuries, religious persecution stopped throughout the West. Now, eventually, Christianity did become the official religion of the empire, and for better or for worse. I mean, I'm not saying they should have, but eventually paganism was outlawed. And for all practical purposes, then paganism was dead. Now, I say paganism was dead tongue-in-cheek, but a lot of historians will tell you that paganism simply changed its name and found its way into the Christian church. Jupiter became St. Peter. Isis became Mary. Osiris became Jesus. And basically, under these guises, paganism then found its way inside the church and marched on with Christian names, but with basically worshiping the same deities. Again, you can just take for that whatever you will. Pagan holidays were transformed to Christian holidays. And again, folks, I'm not knocking it. You can say all you want to, well, Easter was a pagan holiday, but if you look on the pagan calendar, every day of the year was a pagan holiday. So how were they to pick a day that was not a pagan holiday? Yeah, Christmas, December 25th, once was a pagan holiday. Again, if you want to know why December 25th was a holiday, on December 21st, the sun would get as low as it ever got, but you couldn't tell if the sun was coming back up. 22nd, well, the sun was still there. 23rd, sun was still there. 24th, another sun, but by the 25th, the sun had come up a little bit. Everybody go, hey, we have a feast. That means the sun is starting to move north, so that means we're going to have spring again, we have summer again. So they'd all get together and have a big feast because the sun was noticeably north. So that's why they would celebrate December 25th. I'm not saying it was any, again, some people criticize them for it. They celebrated on a pagan holiday, but like I mentioned, every day in a calendar was some pagan holiday. Oh yes, the word September, by the way, the word sept has to do with seventh. The word September means seventh month. October, the first thing I think of that has October around it is octopus. How many arms does an octopus have? 8. October was the 8th month. November, I think of Novocaine. November is the 9th month. December, decade, decimal, has to do with the number 10. December is the 10th month. What am I getting at? The oldest record, Christburg said that Jesus was born on the 25th day of the 12th month. But actually December was the 10th month by the old calendar. I mean, the word December means 10th month. It's more likely Christ was born around February 25th, folk. The 25th day. That also Caesar was more likely to issue his tax law as spring was approaching, rather than the dead of winter when people would have to move around in the dead of winter. I mean, it just seems kind of impractical. But by February 25th, you still have cold days, but winter is almost over. And the days tend to be warmer late in February, not always. I mean, I've seen some of the biggest snows that you ever see will occur around the end of February and the first part of March. The biggest snowstorm I've seen down here occurred on March 13th. The year was 1993, by the way, and then we didn't have a snow for many years after that. But anyway, just something, a little bit of trivia I thought I'd throw in. Constantine moved the capital to Constantinople. In other words, this place right here, and again, this was ideally located between the Mediterranean Sea and the Black Sea. And if you wonder why, part of it was, oh, let's face it, buildings get old. Now, when this building right here gets too old and the plumbing begins to get corroded and the electrical wiring becomes just simply unusable, the cheapest thing, you might decide, hey, the cheapest way to fix this is going to get a wrecking ball and a bulldozer. Bulldoze it level and start from the ground up and build it again. And I've seen that done a lot in my lifetime. Sometimes that's the cheapest way to restore an old building, except for one thing: when your building is made of solid stone and it starts to crack and crumble, it's difficult to repair that. You have to first move the old stone far, far away. Well, Constantine today, the thing I want to do is just start all over from scratch and build another city. So we started from scratch and built a city of Constantinople right along here where the Black Sea joins the Mediterranean, basically joined the Mediterranean, and named the city after himself. Now, unfortunately, he followed the economic practices of Diocletian. He tried to freeze prices, freeze wages, enforced the laws that every man must work in the profession of his father. The government would pick your profession for you if you did not have one, all of which I say he shouldn't have done, but nevertheless, I mean, it's in the records, he did. Now, as soon as he'd gotten the church kind of squared away, he began to realize that the church had all kinds of doctrinal disputes. So he called together the first church council. Now, folk, again, this was dangerous. Not about the idea of calling a council, but the idea that the emperor would call a council. And what's wrong with that? It means that the emperor is actually head of the church. Now, if Constantine would have joined the church, I'd say amen to that. And if he had just sat down as one of the members and let the church run itself, he didn't. He was the emperor, and he said, I'm going to run the church. And the result was the church declined for hundreds of years, to make a long story short. But the Council of Nicaea, which he called, one thing it did was define which writings were sacred or part of the Bible, which ones weren't. Now, I want to state this, folks. I mean, officially you'll hear the Council of Nicaea pick the books of the Bible. That's not exactly true. The fact is the books had already been picked for a couple hundred years, and the Council of Nicaea made an official stamp of what books were included and what were not. But it wasn't that. So really what he did was, what the council did was give approval to what the church had already been doing. They rejected some writings and accepted some others. And again, why, that's a big topic in and of itself. But yes, you have a comment? Okay, well, that is a huge topic. But all right, to answer your question as best I can real shortly, a lot had to do with content. In other words, did these agree, and also with authorship. The writings of Paul were included, and the writings of Peter were included because they had been definitely apostles. The writing of Jesus' two brothers, James and Jude, were included. And then the writings of the four Gospels, Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, were included. And also the writings of John, the beloved disciple of Jesus, were included. And that's about it. So it had to do with authorship, for one, and also content. Now, when I talk about content, so much of the writings that were rejected on the grounds that they would say that sex is very, very evil and no man should engage in it, and the best way to live is a life complete without sex. Those kind of writings did not make it into the canon. Those writings were going around all over the place. And also there were writings that described women as just a bunch of trash. Those writings were going around. Those writings, by the way, did not, and I repeat, did not make it into the canon. So in other words, some of the writings that didn't make it didn't make it because of the bad content. Yes?
Well, I know all the other books.
Say again?
I know the rest of the books they didn't keep. They're just gone.
How do they decide what to keep?
The ones they didn't keep, what happened to them?
Oh, we still have a bunch of them around. Yeah, a lot of them have what they call Gnosticism. They're still around, and every once in a while you hear from them. And some people are still pleading for them and saying these books should have been included. And if you go to the right YouTube videos, they'll talk about books that supposedly should have been included but were not, but were rejected. I personally have to say that the Bible that the Council of Nicaea accepted has been accepted by Catholic and Protestant alike, and even the Pentecostals, the more radical forms of Protestants, accept that as being the Scripture. It's been accepted for hundreds, but no one man decided in no one generation. It was actually decided by many people over a long period of time, and they finally rejected the more extreme writings and accepted some of the writings forbade people to eat meat. And the Apostle Paul had this to say: any kind of meat you want to eat is okay. And he was a Jew, but he said that in effect, would they eat snake meat or mouse meat or whatever? Sometimes folk you're forced to eat this stuff during time of famine or siege. But he said this was okay. Any meat at all you wanted to eat. All right. Anyway, they defined a doctrine that was to last for more than millennia. Now, after Constantine died, most of the emperors who followed him were Christian. There was one who was not, and they called him the apostate, Julian Apostate. But for the most part, all the emperors after him were Christian. All right. Again, Constantine's efforts, it's like you see a man with a bunch of skin cancer. So what you do, just put a bunch of adhesive tape on the cancer and say, hey, we hope you get well. Will not work. In effect, it was like he was treating the symptom. The real disease he was not treating. The Roman Empire continued to decline. Now, when I was in the 6th grade, we had a history book that had a bunch of cartoons. And one of the cartoons showed two men, and they were carrying a big, big, heavy sack. You could tell the sack was full of coins. The caption was, heavy taxes, most of all, caused the Roman Empire's fall. This bureaucracy and military bureaucracy and the wars they were fighting, plus the decline in population, meant that the other people who were left were going to be taxed. And folk, when I was writing my term paper 50 years ago, I talked about heavy taxes. But today it's gotten worse. The refugee problem. The European nation to take these people in, they're going to have to feed them. Either that or let them starve to death. And Donald Trump has said, if they come here, I'll kick them right out. We'll see if he actually can pull that off. But basically the point I'm making is we can expect to be taxed heavier and heavier and heavier as time goes on. Hopefully I'll be proven wrong. But again, we have to support an army, we have to fight wars overseas that we don't win. We just keep on fighting over and over and over and over in endless wars that simply drain our budget. The Romans did the same thing. All right. While all this was going on, there were a bunch of barbarian invasions. All these people at first were barbarians. All right. They're mainly German. Now, among the Germans, there were the Vandals, from whom we get the word vandalism. They sacked Rome in 410 CE. The Goths, they consist of the East Goths and West Goths. These were the East, and the Visigoths. These were the West Goths. And I want you to learn these names because we're going to see them again when we come back to Rome, to the late Roman Empire. After the next test on Monday of next week, we'll visit North America, South America, Africa, Islam, and then China, medieval India, Japan, Korea, Vietnam, these places. Then we come back to Western, and we'll run into these people again. They replaced the Latin population or the native Roman population until eventually Latin was no longer the spoken language of the empire. In fact, Latin eventually was no longer spoken anywhere. Visigoths, that's Visigoths. Looks like some of you are starting to see it. Now, there was a book written some 70 years ago that was still around. I doubt many others heard of it. It was called The 10 Most Decisive Battles in World History. In that book was mentioned the Battle of Adrianople. At the Battle of Adrianople, for the first time in hundreds of years, the entire Roman legions were defeated by a barbarian army. Now, the Germans, we believe, were bigger than the Romans, but the Romans had better organization, and the Romans believed that they could outfight the Germans because they were better organized and had better weaponry and better armor. All that be what it may, but eventually the Germans greatly outnumbered the Romans, and this was to play a big role in helping defeat the Romans. They were simply outnumbered. At this point, after the Battle of Adrianople, German people began to move freely throughout the empire, stealing everything, looting, vandalizing, taking whatever they wanted, and the Roman government seemed powerless to stop them. Then, over the horizon came a group of people who terrified both the Germans and the Romans. And we'll be talking about people like this throughout the rest of the semester, off and on. From far off in Mongolia came a group of people known as the Huns. The Huns were led by Attila the Hun, one of the most infamous people in all of history. Now, folks, I don't know what it's like, and none of you do either. But first you hear a rumor that off in the distance is a vast, vast, vast horde of people heading your way. When the Roman officials heard this rumor, they sent some men on horseback to investigate. These men made a fairly long trip, and then they saw them. Just vast, vast hordes of people. I mean, it wasn't like locusts. I mean, these were well-armed, heavily armed people on their horses and their donkeys and whatever, with their backpacks, heading their way. And they were great in number. Attila the Hun believed that he was divinely appointed to take over Rome. I'll give you Attila's name when we come back to this in chapter 12. But anyway, Attila the Hun. There have been many, many Mongolian invasions. The last one was led by Genghis Khan. But the Bulgars, the Turks, the Magyars, all came from Central Asia, mostly from what we today know of as Mongolia. And Mongolia was a big, vast land that sometimes could not support the people who was born in because of dry weather. And certain people would be forced out. The Huns were one of those people who were forced out. They came to Europe. Eventually, a combined Roman and German army got together, and they defeated Attila. And Attila was about to commit suicide, thinking surely that his God had left him. But the Roman general wanted to use Attila to fight against the Germans, because after all, the Germans had just defeated the Romans, and then the Romans got together with the Germans. So the general was wanting to play off the Huns against the Germans. So he left Attila alive, and actually he left a big hole in his ranks to where he knew the Huns would find and escape. So the Huns were able to escape. But this also, the Huns, before they settled down and founded the nation of Hungary, did irreparable damage. Now, the East was able to hold on to its own, but the West suffered invasion after invasion from the Germans and from the Huns, while the East got away with it somewhat, at least temporarily. And finally, to make a long story short, in 476 CE, yeah, I'll write that down, the last emperor, named Romulus Augustus. The Emperor Romulus was 11 years old. He was deposed. Historians mark this as being the end of the Roman Empire. Now, this ought to scare us, because the people living in Rome did not know that their empire had come to an end. And what if the future, we could look at a future history book and they would say the United States came to an end in the year 2008 with a big bank crisis, and that is believed to be the end of the big bailouts that occurred in 2008 and 2009 was the end of the United States as we know it, the end of American democracy. Hey, we're still a democracy, we're still here. Maybe we are, maybe we're not. But I had a student ask me, how come we don't see a civilization fall anymore? I said, perhaps our own civilization has already fallen and we don't know it. When Rome fell, the people living at that time did not realize it had fallen. And they were to spend the next 1,000 years trying to revive it. They crowned Charlemagne Roman emperor. The year was 800. We'll talk about that later. They crowned other Roman emperors after that. All in an attempt to revive the Roman emperor. Otto was crowned Roman emperor. And then there was a whole line, and finally Napoleon Bonaparte in 1802 abolished the title of Holy Roman Emperor because it had been a trouble spot in Europe. But anyway, finally we've realized the Roman Empire had fallen. Then we began to find out reasons why it had fallen. And folk, one thing that you run into with modern historians, when they talk about why did Rome fall, they'll say, well, we don't know for sure. And I was reading a book over the weekend about this very topic, and it said a lot of people try to study it, thinking if we study why Rome fell, we can figure out why Rome fell and make sure that we don't fall in the same path. However, this ought to also point out, even if we knew why Rome fell, could we convince enough people to not do the same things to make sure that we don't fall? In other words, are we going to give up on our welfare state to make sure that we don't collapse under the weight of our own excesses just because Rome did? Whatever. There have been reasons. Now, one reason, it has been said that the young men did not want to serve in the army. All that's true. Another reason they've been on lead pipes, lead poisoning. Lead is known to poison. At one time, the paint on our walls was made out of lead. Today, lead paints have been outlawed, and I seriously doubt there's any lead paint here. Lead paint has been outlawed for about 50 years in this country, but the older houses built in the 1950s a lot of times had lead paint. And folk, when my dad worked as a plumber, he'd bring lead home, and we kids would melt the lead in tin cans and pour the lead into molds and make chess pieces. Don't you do that. And don't ask me how we got away with it. But don't you do that. The Romans ate off of lead plates and drank from lead cups. Again, some people believe that this hurt them, even though, weirdly enough, Christians could eat from the same plates and drink from the same cups and live to be in their 50s and 60s. So what caused Rome to fall? Well, some people say it was Christianity. Gibbon, the historian Gibbon in the 1700s, said that Christianity made the people less interested in fighting and made people more interested in the hereafter than the here and now, and quit building up the here and now. The communists were to say the same thing. If you believe that, folk, you'd have to turn around and say that this is something Gibbon did not know. Living in the early 1700s, he did. You have to turn around and explain why it was Christendom that invented the automobile, the airplane, the computer, the internet, invented mostly in Christian framework, the light bulb, and Christendom wound up overspreading most of the globe and becoming on top of the world culturally and economically. But this is something Gibbon did not realize would happen. Again, I would actually in some ways tend to agree with Gibbon, because here was the problem that they had with earlier forms of Christianity, folks. It did not separate church from state. That was to come later. Church and state united makes for a terrible mix. I mean, folks, it was so bad here in Russia that when the communists took over in 1917, Lenin appointed the church's patriarch. I mean, why shouldn't he? All the czars had appointed patriarchs. You may know when the Pope resigns, which king or which government appoints the next Pope. Oh, you all know that. I'm pulling your leg. No king appoints the Pope. Hasn't in centuries. Now, many centuries ago, there was a king of France who did appoint a few popes, but this practice was quickly stopped. The fact is, the church assembles and they appoint their own pope, which is the way it should be. Church officials should not be appointed by state governments, but for many years, this is exactly what happened. Constantine appointed the bishops of Rome and the other bishops, the patriarchs, and the result was Eastern Orthodox Christianity was to have the emperor at the head of the church, and I think this was very, very bad. All right, the main thing, though, your book says that you can actually prove. All right, there were several things wrong. Morality declined, but the one thing it actually proved was there was a population decline. And the population decline started even before the plagues and the wars came. And folk, about wars, you might think it's obvious that wars lead to population decline. Very, very badly wrong. Wars bring in more people than they take out. Well, how can that be? Because when the men get home from the wars, they started having babies like crazy, called baby boom. My dad was a war baby. His father had served in World War I. I was a war baby. There was a big baby boom after World War II, of which I'm a part of. It's called the baby boom generation. A big population increase. And oftentimes, they named their new babies after fallen relatives who fell in the war. I had an uncle who died in World War II, so I have a first cousin named Calvin. My uncle's name was Calvin. So I have a cousin named Calvin. Wars bring in more people than they take out. So it wasn't the wars that killed them. Plagues, that's another matter. But what really killed off the Roman population was the men and women disliked each other so much that they no longer had as many children as they once had. The women simply would not have children because they were afraid it would ruin their figures or ruin their appearance permanently, and in a lot of cases it does, folks. This you can prove, that the population declined. They had a love for brutality in sports. They had an unfavorable balance of trade, which I've already mentioned, but something else. The whole empire was built on decaying culture. The Hellenistic culture was decaying. The culture here of Carthage was decaying. The culture of the Celts was decaying. These people were heading in toward more primitive times. The whole world, the Western World East, was declining. And if you build a house out of rotten wood, your house is not going to last long. If you build it out of nice, freshly cut wood that's in tip-top shape and protect that wood, it can last a long time, maybe 100, 200 years. But Rome was built of decayed material to begin with. And that's why the rest of the Western world more or less just fell to Rome's lap. And they were looking to Rome, hey, Rome, can you save us from the decay? And Rome did for a while, but then Rome decayed itself. It has been said they never had a workable political system. This is true. The seeds of the destruction were sown right at the beginning when they did not define what offices were and what each office meant to the person who held it. Old Roman ways were abandoned as Rome began to invite more and more foreigners to take over their offices and serve in the army, and the old ways. But here's the thing. What today's historians believe about the fall of Rome, you don't know for sure why it happened, and you cannot assign it to any one cause. However, Rome fell from within. This is a standard view of what distorted. Rome fell from within rather than fall from without. And if Western civilization falls, it will have fallen from within, more so than from without. Every idea you can put forth has its people who believe it and also its people who challenge it. And many ideas have been put forth. What was wrong with Rome was several things that just gradually decayed, declined, until after a while there was nothing left of it. And it was, the decay was so gradual, it's difficult to put a date on exactly when it happened. All right. Having said that, oh yeah, as Rome declined, we'll talk about this next time we visit the West. Europe went into a period we used to call the Dark Ages. And eventually Europe pulled itself up its bootstraps. It went through a Renaissance and then a Reformation. The Reformation was to lead to the Enlightenment, and the Enlightenment was to lead to scientific and political and economic reformation. As for all the gold that Europe lost, Europe was to wind up stealing that gold, and a whole lot of gold back from the American Indians, and that got Europe back into the gold market again, or back in, you might say, brought some wealth to Europe again. But Europe was to decline for a long time before it was to rise back up again. All right, having said all that, I have covered everything about the chapter on Rome. So come Monday, we'll take up with the American Indians. All right, I have about 3 or 4 minutes left. One question I want to ask. Nobody in the morning class knew it. What is significant about linear B script?
From left.
But it's not just read from left to right. It is linear. Yeah, it was read from left to right, so it led from down to up and right to left. But yes.
Didn't it prove something was Greek or something?
It proved that the people who wrote it were Greek, and therefore the civilization, the people, the Mycenaeans were in fact Greek. The Minoans are not Greek. We don't know for sure what they were, but the Mycenaeans were definitely Greek. All right. Yeah, I'm surprised how many students did not know this. I mean, I've tried it. Who was Alexander the Great's father? Very important. Philip of Macedon. Philip of Macedon. All right, can you name the 2 Persian kings who tried to conquer Greece? They were father and son. Darius and Xerxes. Darius and Xerxes. Who's the Greek philosopher who said, "Do as I say, but don't do as I do"? Plato. Plato. Yeah, do as I say, but not. There is some of this you'll find if you listen to the last part of the lecture. But let's see if I can think of some different ones. Oh yeah, who is the blind Greek poet who wrote the Iliad and Odyssey? Homer, most of you probably knew that to begin with. Wrote the Iliad and Odyssey. Who is the chief of the Greek gods? Zeus. The Romans called him Jupiter. Same deity, Zeus. Let's see. Oh yes. The Germans tended to be tall and blonde, and I'll state this really quickly. My 1930 history book, that my professor was using in 1971, the professor there was older than I am. It taught German superiority, and it was written in 1930, and German superiority, folks, was being taught on both sides of the Atlantic. The master race and German superiority, Aryan superiority, and this book emphasized that the Germans were taller than were the Romans, which might have been partly true, but it does not prove racial superiority. And in fact, in the long run, the Germans disgraced themselves more so than other people in Europe have. All right, but that's jumping way ahead of the story. Let's see. Oh, the first Punic War was fought over which place? The first Punic War. They fought it over, maybe at first we better ask, what were the Punic Wars? Fought between Carthage and Rome. And first was fought over the island of Sicily. The second one was fought over Spain. And the second one put forth a great leader. What's his name? Hannibal. The leader named Hannibal. He outmaneuvered the Romans for some 20 years. Unfortunately, he couldn't keep outmaneuvering it forever. All right. Well, it was the most famous oracle they had in Greece that eventually went silent on them, but the oracle was located at what place? What city? Delphi. Yeah, I like to think of Delphi. Yeah, Delphi. The oracle of Delphi. All right, anybody have any further question or comment on my watch? It's time. If not, everybody have a good couple of days. Prepare a lot. I'll tell you, the best way to prepare is to study hard on Monday tonight and forget about it Tuesday. Yeah, somebody nodding their head. Sometimes that works, folks. Don't stay up all night Tuesday night. It won't help you that much. All right, have a good couple of days.